Hello there and welcome once again to The Verdict. I'm Mick Cornett along with Kent Myers. We're here every week meeting interesting people and dealing with topical issues, and this one's both topical and a gentleman who knows the subject in and out.
Yes, we're going to be visiting with Lee Slater, the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission in Oklahoma and a longtime personal friend of mine and a colleague of sorts. We've actually been on opposite sides of cases more often than we've been on the same side. But Lee is a very good lawyer, very well-respected person all over the state of Oklahoma and outside, and he's doing a grand job in his relatively new position since 2003 as head of the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission.
He has been at the forefront of the reform that's taken place in the Ethics Commission, and so we'll talk about that, what it used to be like, what it's like now, and the transition of all of those decisions being made by the legislature and how they deal with elected officials all over the state. It's Today on The Verdict. We'll be right back.
I've known I was going to be an artist since I was a little kid. I still have teachers that in grade school that still have my artwork. I think I told them something along the lines, this is keep that, it's going to be worth money someday. I'm Justin Mader, I'm an artist, and I'm Chickasaw. My muse is the Muskogean, Mississippian art. When I see that, my mind just fills up with bubbles of ideas. My big thing right now is shell carving, the shell gorgets. My work is refined more and more until I found my own rhythm. I also do metallurgy, where I've been acid etching copper and hammering copper to make a copper repoussé. You only have one chance to do it right, so it requires a lot of planning and thought and just patience. My Chickasaw heritage is the foundation of who I am. It's the roots of where I come from, and it inspires me as an artist and inspires the tenacity of never giving up.
Learn more about today's Chickasaws at profilesofanation.com.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. Kent's going to introduce today's guest.
It's really fun to have an interesting guest on who also happens to be a friend. And that's what we have in this show with Lee Slater joining us today. He's the Executive Director, as I indicated, of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. He did his undergraduate work at the University of Oklahoma, got an MBA from University of Central Oklahoma, did his law work at Oklahoma City University. So he's made good use of all of the local universities around and done it successfully, I might add. For 17 years, approximately, he was a secretary of the Oklahoma State Senate and the chairman of the State Election Board, secretary of the State Election Board. He was in private practice for 25 years and then in 2003 made a change and came back to work in a state agency, the Ethics Commission, as its executive director, and it's been there since 2013. Lee, welcome to The Verdict, and thanks for your service to the state.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted.
Well, and I mentioned in the introduction that there's been a lot of reform that's taken place, and you've been principally behind that. So kind of give us some background. Why did you seem called to come back and say, we just got to straighten this thing out?
Well, I don't know that I've felt necessarily that I ought to straighten things out, but I've been in private practice for 25 years and was looking to do something different and try to wind down my law practice, and this opportunity came along. It's an area of law that I've practiced for the last 25 years, and I had some unique qualifications. I found out, Kent, that one of the things that was the smartest thing I did was practice some law that nobody else practiced, so you never knew whether I was any good at it or not.
That's a pretty good trick.
So the job was offered to me, and I thought I could perform some service, and took it.
And you came in and you looked at the current campaign forms and reporting sheets and said, we can do better.
Yeah, you know, the campaign laws and the lobbyist regulation laws that were in place in 2013 when I came in had basically been the same for 20 years. Laws get amended over time. The ethics rules got amended over time, and they become internally inconsistent and contradictory and just needed a general cleanup. And frankly, we're a little behind the curve on developments in campaign finance law and lobbyist regulation. And that happens with any code, and this just happens to be the one governing campaign finance and lobbyist regulation, conflicts of interest, et cetera.
Tell us why we need an ethics commission. I know the people of the state of Oklahoma created the ethics commission by a change to the Oklahoma Constitution, but why do we need one?
Well, the premise for the Ethics Commission has two constitutional duties. One is to promulgate rules of ethical conduct for campaigns for state office and state questions, and the other is to promulgate rules of ethical conduct for state officers and employees. With respect to campaigns, I think that there was a demand during the 70s and 80s, particularly following Watergate, that the citizens needed to know who was financially supporting candidates for office so that they would know how that might affect their decisions when they went to the polls. And that's kind of the genesis of campaign finance reporting. We tried a number of formulas in Oklahoma from 1974 to the mid-'80s. None of them were very successful, and in the late '80s, Governor Bellman created a Constitutional Revision Commission, and that commission recommended that an ethics commission be created in the Constitution. And that happened in 1990. The people approved the question by about a 2-to-1 vote, and the commission came into existence in 1991.
In general, people know that people and perhaps businesses can give money to candidates and political action committees. Can you kind of summarize who can give what and what are the limits out there in the state?
Yeah, basically, we've changed the system with the laws that became effective, the new rules that became effective January 1 of 2015. Individuals, any entity except corporations can make direct contributions to candidates for state office. Those contributions are limited to $2,600 per individual per election. That's a change from the old law. It's a little bit of an increase. It's the first time there's been an increase in the allowed campaign contributions in Oklahoma since 1974.
Wow.
So it's not as great an increase as some might think.
Yeah. What was the prior limit?
Well, there was from 1974 until the end of last year, it's $5,000 per family per campaign. And as I'm sure you know, I think the per family prohibition was unconstitutional, so we changed it to make it per individual per election in the new rules, which is constitutional, and also is an attempt to put the money where the candidates need it. So if you don't have a runoff primary, you don't need money for that campaign. If you do have, you need to be able to raise more money, and that's what the commission considered and promulgated.
Mm-hmm. Is this more in line with what other states have done?
You know, the states are all over the place. To give you two examples, in Texas and Missouri, there are no limits. No limits. You can put $1 million into a candidate's campaign, and that's happened, I think. Other states have much lower limits than we do. What the commission sought to do is to have reasonable limits so that we'd get voluntary compliance. We think that voluntary compliance is very important. If you ratchet down the limits too low, then you're going to have people coming up with ways to circumvent them or to just violate them, and we didn't want that. What we wanted is rules that people can follow, that are easy to understand, and that they'll comply with.
What about, I know your commission regulates donations to candidates. What about organizations that raise money to, but not purportedly to give money to candidates, but to support a particular candidate's position. Do you regulate those folks as well?
We do, and that's the
PACs or whatever.
yes, that's the biggest new development in campaign finance, and probably the most significant in our country's history of campaign finance. For years, political action committees have been active. They were the solution back in '74 when, in the post-Watergate days, where individuals can pool their resources and make contributions to candidates. Historically, corporations have always been prohibited from doing that, and there's always been limits on contributions going into political action committees. In 2010, the United States Supreme Court handed down the Citizens United case, and the Citizens United case says that you cannot limit, constitutionally cannot limit, the amount of money that anyone can spend making independent expenditures. Independent expenditures are those expenditures that are not coordinated with a candidate, but that can advocate the election or defeat of a candidate. So almost overnight, we had a situation where there was more money being spent in independent expenditures than the candidates actually spent on their own campaigns. In the state of Florida last year, for example, in a governor's race, independent expenditures accounted for nearly 90% of the total spending in that campaign. And very hotly contested.
If the Supreme Court decision said you can't limit the amount, can you still require, however, reporting?
You can, and there's misunderstanding about that. We can require reporting if the funds were solicited for that purpose.
Yeah.
But if under the Citizens United case, a corporation, an independent corporation, a for-profit corporation, XYZ widget manufacturers can make an independent expenditure. Well, that corporation may not have any contributors. It's only got its general treasury funds. Similarly, there are associations that charge dues and collect money from their members in other ways, not for the purpose of making independent expenditures, but then a situation develops and a candidate attacks their industry or is supportive of their industry, and they say, hey, we need to spend some of our money to support or oppose this candidate. And you can't go back and require them to identify the people who paid dues in that organization. But if there's a solicitation for the purpose of making independent expenditures, we can and do require the disclosure of the contributors.
Lee Slater is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. We'll be right back.
It's a North American energy revolution. We're the fastest growing source of new oil and natural gas supplies in the world.
The shift to North American energy will create approximately 3 million jobs.
All that money we've been sending overseas, $400 billion a year. Imagine that staying in our economy. It's a game changer.
Real energy independence starts now, and it starts with Oklahoma.
The good life comes naturally to Tulsa, where nature's beauty is matched with an eye for aesthetics. A legacy of neighborhoods graced with lawns and landscaping and handsome homes. A place that seems to have patented an ideal lifestyle. Bank First is loyal to the quality of life Tulsa assures its citizens, to the priority placed on education, culture, and growth. Loyal to builders who transform raw land into residential charm. Developers who see opportunity and add vitality to Tulsa's economy. Bank First serves both enterprise and private lives that need a loyal partner. It's how we help nurture this city's very good life. Bank First. Loyal to Oklahoma. Loyal to you.
We're back on The Verdict, visiting with Lee Slater. He's the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. and that is one of the branches of the state of Oklahoma, or at least an agency of the state of Oklahoma.
It is. It's an agency in the executive branch.
Talk about how it's constituted. How is the commission selected?
The commission is comprised of 5 members. They serve staggered 5-year terms. They can serve 2 consecutive terms. There are 5 different appointing authorities. The governor appoints 1 member, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court appoints 1 member, the Attorney General appoints 1, and the President Pro Tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House each appoint 1. They represent all 5 congressional districts. No more than a majority can be of the same political party. So we have a very diverse requirement. And we've got a very diverse and highly competent group of individuals assembled right now.
Can they serve more than 1 term?
They can serve 2 terms consecutively, and they are term limited to 2 terms.
So do you report to the governor, or do you report to the chairman of the commission?
I report to the commission. The commission actually appoints me under the Constitution, and that's who I report to.
Let's talk about the biggest challenge when you took this job. What was the biggest challenge you faced?
You know, I had a charge from the commission. When I interviewed for the job, I told the commission that if they wanted somebody to come in and maintain the status quo, they needed to get someone else. That I viewed myself as a change agent. When I was Secretary of the State Election Board, we rewrote the entire election code in 1974. And I contemplated doing something similar at the Ethics Commission, and I think I bit off at least as much as I can chew, and maybe a little more. We have completely rewritten the rules. The commission promulgated all new rules this past year. We are in the process right now of implementing a totally new software system for campaign finance reporting and lobbyist registration and reporting, and financial disclosure will be online also for the first time. We have developed guides and training programs, continuing education programs for our regulated community, for those people who are subject to our regulations, and have started implementing those. And we've done this with a staff of 5, counting myself, and I am now the senior member of the staff. All 5 people have started since February of 2013, so it's been a challenging but rewarding time. We have a very hard-working and competent staff.
I think most people are probably aware that if I asked a person, how many elected officials do you think there are in the state, they'd probably say, oh, there must be hundreds. But there's thousands. I mean, when you count every school board, every city council, the state legislature, all the county positions. Do you have any idea how many elected officials are there in Oklahoma? Are you supposed to count them?
I think thousands is accurate. I don't know how many municipalities and school districts there are in the state, but that's in triple digits, obviously. There are 149 legislators, about 13 elected statewide officials, left out district judges and district attorneys.
Yeah.
We've got dozens of those, and of course, every county has, of the 77 counties, have, I think it's 7 elected offices. And in addition to that, we also do promulgate rules of ethical conduct for state officers and employees. So we've got another 40,000 state officers and employees who are subject to our jurisdiction.
When a candidate or an organization, we'll just assume, violates the rules of the commission, how is that brought to fruition about what ought to happen?
Well, the commission has the authority to prosecute in the district court civilly for violation of its rules. That rarely happens. What we seek to do is to work out settlement agreements for the worst violations. And for minor violations, we take kind of a sin no more approach. We try to get them on the right course and give them enough support and understanding of the rules so that they don't run afoul of the rules again. To give you an example, this last year we had settlement agreements with a legislator who was spending campaign funds for personal purposes, and we made him repay those funds and pay a fine. The fine goes into the state treasury, by the way, not to the Ethics Commission. We had an organization that hired a lobbyist, or actually 2 lobbyists, and was giving gifts to legislators, and those gifts were not being reported. So we, interestingly enough, put them on probation for 3 years, said that they couldn't give anything to any state officer or employee for 3 years, and they paid a fine as well. And we had a political action committee, actually a corporation, an out-of-state corporation, that made several $100,000 in independent expenditures in legislative races last year, and didn't register, didn't report. We thought that they needed a $10,000 reminder so that they wouldn't do that again.
If you look at our state's history, there have been times when state governments seem to have a lot of issues as far as ethics. And then we all, you know, if you're as old as me, you remember the county commissioner scandal of the 1980s. And there's been incidental examples in city government, you know, throughout the state of Oklahoma. Are we better off now at this juncture? Are we about the same as we've always been? What's the state of ethics among elected officials in Oklahoma?
You know, I think that there is a greater sense among the elected officials who come in seeking office thinking that they have to comply with some rules. When I started in state government back in the Stone Age in 1971, there were virtually no campaign finance reporting laws. So it was kind of the Wild West. Anything went, and there were a lot of abuses, I think, and the same with lobbyist regulation. Now in the Capitol, we've got people who have always had campaign reporting to do from the first time they ever ran for public office and every time they've run for public office. So it's nothing new for them, and they're used to it. I think they are same way with lobbyists and the interaction between the legislature and lobbyists. I think there is just a general understanding that they are going to have to conform with rules. Their focus is on how they conform with rules.
Talk to us about the term lobbyist. A citizen can walk out to the Capitol and find their representative and say, I think you ought to vote yes on this bill or no on this bill. And that's permitted, I think, under free speech and other things.
Absolutely.
And that citizen, I don't think, has to register as a lobbyist if they do that. But when do you cross the line in becoming a lobbyist by definition?
Basically by getting paid to do it.
Okay.
When an entity pays you to lobby the legislature or to lobby an executive agency, and that's a substantial part of your job duties or your contract with the person who's paying you, then you're required to register as a lobbyist, and you fall under the limitations that the rules provide.
And do they register with your office? Is
they
that
do.
Where
they register online with the Ethics Commission, and in fact, this year we've had right at 500 registered lobbyists and liaisons. Yes.
You know, about a year and a half ago, we opened a time capsule in Oklahoma City, and the mayor of 1913 wrote a letter to the mayor of 2013. So I got to open this letter. and basically,
who was the mayor in 1913?
Whit, I forget Whit's last name, but Whit was the mayor, and it was a typewritten letter, but 3/4 of the letter was about the corruption at state government. He was just so mad at what was going on at 23rd, and keep in mind, it was all brand new, you know, I mean, it had just occurred a few years before. But that was his big concern about looking ahead to 2013, was that they would ever clean up the corruption at the state capitol. So it's good to have a guy like you with some oversight. I know they would appreciate it 100 years later.
Well, they should have had an ethics commission.
Yeah, that's right. Should have had one to start with, shouldn't they? What can the people of Oklahoma do to help you?
Well, basically to understand what we do, that we don't, as I had a state officer come to me who was all upset because he was afraid his girlfriend was going to file a complaint because he had lied to her about why he couldn't marry her. So it's helpful if the people understand that we don't regulate every kind of ethical lapse that people have, whether they're public officials or not, that we deal in campaign finance, lobbyist regulation, conflicts of interest. And if they have problems in those areas, we'd like to talk to them, and we like their input. We need to know what the citizens think we ought to be doing.
All right. Lee Slater is the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission. Thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm sure
thank you,
I've
Lee.
learned a lot.
Thank you.
Kent and I'll have a final word when we return.
All children deserve a life of hope and love, but sometimes they experience a life of pain, neglect, and abuse.
When that happens, Each child deserves all the quality, assistance, and representation that can be offered in our legal system. For more information, call 23-CHILD.
Oklahoma Lawyers for Children, helping to bring hope and love back to the lives of abused children.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
I think for us, once we got started and we began to see the tremendous need just within our state, it really was just a calling for us. The blessings far outweigh any obstacles that we've faced.
You will always be Mom and Dad to me.
The Journal-Record is pleased to be a sponsor of The Verdict. The Journal-Record, since 1903, the best source of Oklahoma business news and legal information.
And for almost 30 years, Oklahoma political, government, and business leaders have turned to the McCarville Report for accurate, reliable, inside information. Visit the McCarville Report online.
Welcome back to the set of The Verdict. Mick Cornett with Kent Myers. We're here wrapping up a show with Lee Slater, who's the Executive Director of the Oklahoma Ethics Commission.
Well, Lee is a great guest, and he's a wonderful selection to head up the Ethics Commission. The way he conducts himself and has conducted himself over the years is a shining example of how all of us could do better in what we try to do. I had the pleasant and to some extent disarming experience of arguing a case against Lee in the Oklahoma Supreme Court. And it was pretty clear to me during the course of that argument the great respect and deference that the members of the Supreme Court pay to Lee because of how he is and who he is and how he conducts himself. So I don't know that there could be a better selection to head up our Ethics Commission than Lee Slater.
I remember when I first ran for public office, I looked at my first ever reporting form, and you start looking at it, and it was hard to decipher. I mean, you didn't know what it was asking for, you know, much less trying to gather the information. So Lee is out there, and he's really cleaned it up and made it, I think, a lot easier to follow, which is, you know, what elected officials want. We have some website information. You can get more about Lee's work at ok.gov/ethics. And we have a website, theverdict.tv. Tell us about a show you'd like to hear about or a guest you'd like to see on an upcoming edition. That's it for this week, though. For Kent, I'm Mick. We'll see you next week.